And this shows the failure of Joe Biden's plan from day one on COVID. It's been a one-size-fits-all vaccine-only approach. And Jim Jordan talked about this. If everybody in the nation was vaccinated, I think Brad Wenstrup mentioned it from the Doctors Caucus perspective. If everybody in the nation was vaccinated, there's still variants that are going to come out. Initially, you had administration officials saying, well, if you're vaccinated, you either can't get it or can't distribute and give COVID to other people. Well, that's turned out to be not true. You had a Supreme Court Justice, Sotomayor, infer that it wasn't true. And so the vaccine is one part. I've gotten the vaccine. I encourage others to get it, but clearly not everybody is. It is a medical decision. But this idea that you should fire people because they don't get vaccinated, you should shut down businesses because every person walking in the door isn't vaccinated is lunacy. And it's not reality. It's not rooted in what it's going to take to confront this. If you're confronting it with only one approach, when there needs to be a multi-front approach. And we're trying to find more healthcare workers right now. You talk to hospital directors all across the country. They can't find enough doctors and nurses to treat people, and Joe Biden is still moving forward with a plan to fire healthcare workers if they're not vaccinated. A year ago, those same people were all being praised as heroes. And by the way, they still are heroes, according to us. But Joe Biden a year ago called them a hero, and today he wants to fire them. They were unvaccinated a year ago, and they were a hero. Why are they not a hero today? We shouldn't be trying to fire people and take away their livelihoods. We should be trying to have a multi-pronged approach to this. Let's get more alternatives. Monoclonal antibodies are a great example. But this administration has refused on all fronts to advance other alternatives to confront COVID. And again, they still don't have a director of the FDA a year in. And you wonder why we don't have enough emergency use authorizations. Yeah. And if you look, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody doesn't challenge this in the courts. But if you go to the ruling that the Supreme Court just gave the other day on employers of over 100 people across the country, the federal government put in an illegal mandate that every employee had to be vaccinated if the company was over 100 employers. I don't penalize the company for having that dumped on them. They fought it in the courts. And we supported that, by the way. We signed an amicus brief in support of the challenge, and ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court said you can't do it and threw out Biden's mandate. And so ultimately, let's go after these edicts that are coming out. I mean, look, you've got some governors still to this day and some mayors that don't want to let go of the power. It's no longer about science to them. It's about government control versus freedom. Look at the states that are opening up, and many of them have much better success records at dealing with COVID than states that are completely shut down, and those states destroyed their businesses. No, I want to see us challenge these mandates. The mandates shouldn't be forced on people. And again, the Supreme Court just threw out the major one the other day. The employers of over 100 workers got thrown out by the U.S. Supreme Court the other day. Wait, yeah, Jim.
Well, I think the bigger question we need to ask is, what have they told us that's actually turned out to be right? I mean, Joe Biden said 6-8 months ago that he had a federal plan. Joe Biden said there would never be a mandate. Obviously, there has been one. It had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Dr. Fauci said it didn't come from a lab. There was no gain of function. Turns out those look like they were probably false statements. They told us the vaccinated can't get it. They told us the vaccinated can't transmit it. And they said, oh, no, there's no such thing as natural immunity. So there's 7 things they told us that actually turned out not to be accurate. So now we're just supposed to keep taking their word. At some point, just any common sense American says, if you've misled me 7 different times, and there's probably more I'm forgetting about, maybe we should start questioning the things they're doing. And that's all we're saying. So I think that's the key thing that the American people see.
Yeah. Look, ultimately, these are personal decisions, and this is going to get back to the heart of the mandates on vaccination status alone. This is a healthcare decision, and the government right now is treating it as if it's something that they can just require people to do They used to say that the relationship between a doctor and a patient is important. I still believe that. The Doctors Caucus, look at all the medical doctors up here. One of the most sacrosanct relationships is the relationship between a doctor and a patient, and that's where the decision ought to be made. Not this idea that government's going to say, if you don't get the vaccination or now the booster or the second booster, that you can't conduct business, you can't walk into a restaurant, you can't. Now they'll exempt it for voting, but they just want to continue to control people's lives. It's really about government control versus freedom, and I choose freedom. Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's kind of like a scarlet letter. And where the science is being ignored is natural immunity. I mean, you may have a patient that's been vaccinated and has gotten COVID, and their antibodies and their T cells, they may be through the roof. They may be more protected than anybody else. Yet you're putting these restrictions on people when their health is perfectly fine and they're not probably more protected than others. It doesn't make sense, and it's not scientific. It's not a scientific process that approach does not exist in here. And again, blanket statements and one size fits all is dangerous for the health of Americans, and especially with the tone that it's being put out to the American people.
Well, and remember too, President Biden ran. Candidate Biden versus President Biden are two very different people. When he ran, he said he was going to unify the country. He was going to represent all people. And then all of a sudden, it's about shaming people that don't do what he says they should do. When he said, this is a virus of the unvaccinated, is that really a responsible statement, let alone a unifying statement? Of course it's not. And it's those kind of mixed messages from this administration the whole last year that have created this problem to get worse. Yes. Well, think about this. First of all, we spent about $6 trillion. $6 trillion has been spent. Many of those were bipartisan packages. This last year, they decided to go it alone to pay people not to work, to bail out failed states, things that had very little to do with COVID. And that's where we walked away because they weren't trying to help people who really had problems that were struggling. And by the way, everybody knows the biggest problem people are facing is inflation, and they know that all of these multi-trillion-dollar spending bills are the biggest driver of inflation. And so it's just unbelievable that Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi on down just keep doubling down on the failed policies that have created high gas prices, higher inflation. They see a problem that they created, and their answer is to spend trillions more dollars when the public's saying enough. There's $800 billion of unspent money from the previous COVID relief packages. If there were a need, which they haven't even identified, by the way, if there were a need, that's where you would look to go and address it, the money that's unspent. They don't want to have any oversight on the money that's been spent. $6 trillion. That's more than we spent on Social Security, on the Department of Defense, you can go down the line. It's an unbelievable amount of money. It's more than the entire federal government spent an entire year prior to COVID. And they've just spent it trying to pay off their friends, trying to continue to grow the size of government and jacking up inflation. We need to address the real problems this country's facing. There's not a bill on the floor this week, last week, go down the line to address inflation, high gas prices, the border crisis. Look at the foreign policy debacles with Russia getting ready to move in on Ukraine, maybe during the Olympics or right after. Where has this president been in terms of addressing any of those problems? He's helped create many of them, and his weakness in Afghanistan has helped create